In the simplest form, a product certificate is very simple to read. It's basically a statement that says who the organisation is that is certified, the supplier, what the scope of certification is, what the product is, what the standard against that product's been certified is, when the certification was granted, how long it lasts for, if it's going to lapse after a period of time. It may not have an expiry date on it. And then it will go on to include the mark of the certification body, and it should also have the mark of the accreditation body, or the accreditation symbol.
Because the different laboratories and the different standards set different methods of testing, sometimes you need to be able to interpret, is something that's been done overseas okay, and does it meet the Australian equivalency?
And in Australia or New Zealand, if we have an Australia or New Zealand standard, it means that the international standard did not satisfy the needs of Australia. We cannot have an Australian standard if everything is the same as the international standard, otherwise it would be deemed as a barrier to trade. So by definition, if there is an Australian standard, it's because the international standard did not meet the needs of Australia.
The issue is that many clients think that a test report from an international lab to an international standard has equivalency with a test report for an Australian standard. And that's what the biggest problem that we face, because then we have to go back to the client and say, no, that's actually not acceptable. We actually need the right testing, or you need to demonstrate to us why that test report will still satisfy the requirements of the standard. And for us, that's a pretty significant issue, because we operate globally, and most people want certification to the Australian New Zealand standards to be able to bring their product into Australia.
The public believes that when they buy a product, no matter where they buy it, the system will look after them. And so if they don't have that confidence, then the public will not buy, the consumer will not consume, and therefore the market will start collapsing. So it's a very significant issue, and that's why industry, government and regulators and technical infrastructure bodies go to enormous efforts to ensure that there is confidence in the system.
We were confronted a couple of years ago with a situation where a couple of individuals imported a product on the basis that they were given a certificate from an overseas manufacturer. They believed that that product was certified on the basis of that certificate, or the copy of certificate that was given to those individuals, and it turned out that that certificate was a fraudulent certificate. So it was actually a certificate for another product. And unfortunately, the individuals that were involved in that situation, they were essentially held responsible for releasing uncertified product to the market, because one of the unfortunate things is when you have a situation like that where you're dealing with an overseas manufacturer, from a regulatory perspective, our legislation doesn't allow us to regulate beyond Australian shores. So from a regulation perspective, I guess the next thing that we can do is put the onus back on the individual or individuals that have supplied the product to market.
You know, it undermines the whole system. You know, you know, if you think you're getting a correct certificate, the builder goes and purchases the product, thinks that it verifies that it complies, and it's a fraudulent certificate.
Well, it's devastating, because often the people that are targeted with fraudulent or indeed counterfeit certification are unwitting. It's vital that, in addition to checking that the certificate is genuine, or obtaining the certificate themselves, which is another option, they have the test report that went with that certificate, and they review the production against the report. So just a certificate on its own doesn't have a lot of weight. You need to have your whole quality system set up to avoid that sort of fraudulent activity. But the help is available. We're all willing to help. It's part of the job, and it's part of ensuring the integrity of the system.
It brings certification into disrepute, and it just means that the integrity of the whole certification process is at risk. So it's a significant risk for the industry, and it's always challenging, and it's one that not only the certifiers but the accreditation bodies struggle with all the time.
If the certificate itself doesn't have sufficient information, then it can lead to the purchaser making the wrong decision, and indeed having confidence in a certificate that ultimately, when the product is delivered, may not match their expectations.
If the information's missing, then there's no real basis for confidence in the product. And so you've either got to fill that gap by obtaining more documentation, or you're going to have to say that you just don't have the assurance in order to put that product to market. Now, we would hope that a responsible supply chain entity would take that responsibility seriously and would not consider continuing to pass the product towards market until those matters have been addressed.
It is a fact that the whole system that we administer depends upon the characteristics of trust and confidence. If people can't have trust and they can't have confidence in the outputs of certification, the system doesn't work. So that makes it necessary for us to take action sometimes. And sometimes that action might mean requiring a certification body to change its certification, to correct it. It may involve even challenging whether they should continue as a certification body. So when things go wrong, it's our responsibility to step up and correct those problems.
Well, we end up with unsafe events. So we end up with children being injured because of, you know, the cots, the prams, the car seats don't perform in the way that they're intended to be performed. And we must remember also end users have a responsibility to use a product in the way that it was intended. That's why, you know, information gets sent out with a product on how to use it. So, you know, everybody has a dual responsibility.
So certification bodies have nominated people within the certification bodies who are deemed competent to make those certification decisions based on the information provided in those test reports.
To be competent, they have to have had experience in industry, they have to have experience in the standard, knowledge and experience in the standard, and knowledge and experience in how to make a proper certification decision. So that means that they will have worked under the guidance of somebody who's more experienced, who will assess their certification decisions, and then over time decide that these people are capable of making decisions by themselves.
A product certification is granted by a product certification body. So the responsibility for ensuring that the product continues to comply with the certification requirements is with the certified organisation. It's their responsibility to provide compliant product. It's the certification body's responsibility to monitor market performance and ensure that they're all doing it.
To properly interpret a product certificate, again, you've got to read the certificate. You have to know about the standard that the certificate's asserting compliance with. You've got to understand the product and how you're intending to use the product. Those things come together. The end user has a significant role in ensuring that compliant product is the final outcome of the process.